The definition of a revolution is a radical and pervasive change in society and the social structure, especially one made suddenly and often accompanied by violence. The American Revolution occurred due to the oppression of the colonists. They desperately sought their rights to govern themselves and eventually be considered their own free country. The colonists' first experience with oppression was during the Navigation Acts. This was a British policy that severely restricted colonial trade. This angered the colonists because they felt that the king was treating them like disobedient children and punishing them. However, the colonists continued to smuggle and trade in secret with the Dutch. Following the Navigation Acts, the French and Indian War broke out within America. The war was a global conflict over land and geographical interests. Whoever controlled the Ohio River Valley would also control the Mississippi River and the Gulf of Mexico. Britain did not want the French to have any control over any part of the valley, so they moved their troops into the colonies and fought against the French. This upset the colonists because the British were using colonist soldiers to fight their war. The colonists did not ask for the war, but simply felt that they were caught up in a mess that they did not create. The Albany Conference was sponsored by the British government. Britain decided to appoint military commanders within the colonies. The conference then led to the Albany Plan of the Union. The plan was proposed by Benjamin Franklin. He believed that the colonies should unite to form a federal government. However, the plan was rejected by the colonists because they felt they were not ready to cut ties with the king just yet. So they felt that before they could be established on their own, they would need to form for common defense. This was the first major movement to self-government in the colonies. After the French and Indian War, Britain was in a substantial amount of debt. They appointed George Grenville to find a way to decrease the debt. The British decided that the colonists should be expected to pay for the war because it was fought on their land. This extremely angered the colonists because they felt that it was not their war, so why should they have to pay for Britain's mistakes? The first taxation policy placed on the colonists was the Sugar Act. This was a tax on raw sugar, molasses, and rum, and it was the first direct tax on merchants within the colonies. The next taxation policy was the Stamp Act. This was a tax on everyday items such as paper, tea, cards, dice, printed materials, and government materials. This gave Britain full control on trade and was the first direct tax on the colonists themselves. This angered the colonists because not only was their money being taken away for no reason, but these taxation policies were being passed within Parliament, and the colonists had no representation within Parliament to speak for them. This is where the saying, "no taxation without representation," derived from. The Declaratory Acts were a document saying that Britain had power to make all the laws over the colonists. This made no sense to the colonists because they felt that Britain had no idea what was going on within the colonies, and they just wanted to exert their power from afar. The colonists felt that Britain did not see them as a separate country, but as another small piece of their very large empire. The Townshend Acts were created by Charles Townshend. This was a tax on widely popular items such as lead, glass, paper, paint, and tea. The colonists had enough of the British taxation policies and decided to rebel by refusing to buy British goods. This was the start of the Non-Importation Agreement, where the colonists would not allow any British goods within the colonies. This creates a major problem within the British economy. However, the colonists felt that it was an important way to send a message to the British. The British taxation policies created major controversy within the colonies. This is when the Sons of Liberty were recruited. Sam Adams, who was a major rebel against the British within the colonies, led the Sons of Liberty and often committed acts of violence on any signs of British rule within the colonies. They tarred and feathered British soldiers and officials. They burnt down British ships and signs, as well as attacking stores within the colonies that were managed by loyalists or people still supporting the king. The Boston Massacre could be considered one of the most influential parts of the Revolutionary War. After a British tax and customs officer was assaulted in Boston, the British stationed troops there. It was said that the soldiers were being taunted by the colonists, so they shot into the crowd of people and killed many colonists. To this day, we do not know who provoked who, but we do know that this was the turning point where the colonists realized that the British did not have their well-being at heart, but simply looked at them as subjects to control and dominate. They could dispose of them when they needed to and could care less what they have to say or how they feel. The Tea Act is considered one of the final sparks within the Revolution. It was designed to help the East India Trading Company's floundering financial issues. This angered the colonists because it was another taxation policy that disrupted their way of life and their business. However, this time they would not sit back and let their money be taken from them, but decided to take matters into their own hands. Because the colonists refused to buy from the British supply of tea, they had a large amount of it stored in England. The colonists decided that when the boat with all the tea arrived, they would dress like Native Americans and storm the boat to destroy all of the tea and dump it into the Boston Harbor. They wanted to send a message to the British that the oppression was over, and they would no longer wait around for the next taxation policy to rob them of their hard-earned money. But they would stand up and fight against British authority. The Committees of Correspondence were shadow governments organized by the patriot leaders of the colonies. The committees became the leaders of the American resistance to British actions, and largely determined the war effort at the state and local level. They promoted patriotism and home manufacturing, advising colonists to avoid luxuries and lead a more simple life. This way, they did not have to depend so heavily on the British and prove they could succeed without them. The intolerable acts were the final straw within the colonies. The British tried to punish Boston after the Tea Party by closing all ports. They also made a British general become governor and undermined any authority the colonists had. This angered the colonists and forced them to see that if they didn't fight for their rights as a group, they would always be looked at as subjects and irrelevant. They decided that it was time to stand up as one. So the colonists formed the Continental Congress. 12 of the 13 colonies came together to talk about laws and how they should handle their issue with the British. This created unity within the colonies and let them become a stronger force. They decided to settle the Declaration of Rights and Grievances. They gave out the news that a new nation was born. This was the start to the Revolutionary War and their declaring of independence. The American Revolution will be forever considered one of the greatest revolutions of all time. The colonists succeeded in all of their goals. They wanted to achieve economic and political freedom. As John Adams said in 1818, the revolution was effective before the war commenced. The revolution was in the minds and hearts of the people. This radical change in the principles, opinions, sentiments, and affections of the people was the real American Revolution.